Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 312, recorded Monday, August 26th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all of your favorite podcasting platforms, and now on YouTube in video format. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing, liking, and listening to this wherever you find it. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Johnny, but you may know him better online with his handle, Pixel Rips. Hello, sir.
Hello, we've been talking about online handles a little bit, along with the kind of shenanigans that happen in Twitch chat and all sorts of internet culture stuff. In the Render Distance, that's the extended version of the podcast that our patrons get to listen to every week. We do a little bit of pre- and post-show chat outside of the Minecraft stuff, just talking about whatever crosses our minds. So if you're interested in that, you can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You also get access to our Discord. You get to listen to the show live when we record it every week, and we have monthly and quarterly events for our patrons. One upcoming is the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which is happening on the last Saturday of the month, which should be the 31st of August, and gosh, doesn't the time fly. We also have a quarterly Hangout where we get to talk about the behind-the-scenes facts and figures of the podcast. We had one of those recently, but the monthly Hangout is where people can come in and chat about what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. So it's always a great time. We get to look at trends in the community, what people have been building, and all kinds of stuff besides. So if you're interested in all of that, once again, that's patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So what has been new in your Minecraft world this week, my friend?
Several Minecraft worlds, actually. I'm splitting my time between the Survival Guide and Fantasy Minecraft SMP. Survival Guide is happening on videos, and Fantasy Minecraft is taking over my Minecraft streams for now. And I've been doing a bit more terraforming. So you heard about this last week. I've been working on landscaping this new area that I'm planning to use as a fantasy, steampunky, just kind of throw everything at the builds and see what sticks kind of build project. And so I've now got it to the point where I'm happy with the landscape and I want to start on structures. We've got a blue ice monorail that's extending out from my nether portal. That's got sort of archways supporting it and things like that. And I've made it deliberately harder for myself to get around some areas on foot by building tall stone cliffs that will sort of shape the direction I want the roads and paths and transport routes in the town to go. I've left a few of the caves and stuff untouched so that they can be remodeled into a subway system kind of area, or maybe an undercity. I haven't quite decided on the theme yet. There are also stuff outside of the screenshots that I've shared that are not necessarily super terraformed yet. There's a kind of fairly well-rounded meadow biome nearby with a pillager outpost, and I want to turn that into a sort of industrial feeling castle of some kind, kind of take the castle medieval theme and expand it into something that feels like it's got a bit more technology going on inside of it. And there's like other bits and pieces, other places where my imagination could stretch if it extends that far. But for now, I think I'm just happy with the landscape and I'm just getting on with building stuff.
Very, very cool. I like the monorail idea. That's, I can see, especially because I'm assuming that this is now because the momentum of vehicles is maintained when you go through a portal.
The boats do basically stop when they transfer. So like I think or maybe that's changed in a more recent snapshot and I'm waiting for that change to kind of keep up. But I know minecarts are like that, right? Where they'll keep the direction of travel and everything. And so yeah, like the boat's really quick at picking up speed once you're through the portal, so like I could just go from the nether into the overworld and only have like a minor hitch in speed before I build back up to like 70 blocks per second or whatever the maximum travel speed is. But even then, I might switch it to packed ice or maybe regular ice and just kind of allow myself to slow down a little bit so that you can see a bit more of what's going on around you. I'm planning on now collecting a bit more art inspiration for what I'm planning to build here, and I did a bit of digging. Google image search is kind of tricky territory now because, especially if I want to share stuff, it's difficult to avoid AI generated images, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for the sake of just using it as inspiration and then your Minecraft build is the thing that you really want to show people. But I find that a lot of AI stuff just doesn't draw a great deal of coherent structures or straight lines, even though the overall, like, if at a glance it might look like a steampunk cityscape, especially when you look at a thumbnail of it in a Google image search. But now I've found that there's a lot of them that when you click on it and expand it, you think, yeah, that doesn't look like it connects properly there, and like this section is just sort of fudged in a way that doesn't really provide a great deal of helpful insight into how a structure should look. Whereas there are some really fantastic artists out there who've assembled not just really cool vistas of a city that are like fabulously drawn, but also I dug up a concept art that I was using back in 1.17 that actually comes from a 3D model sampler from Kitbash, so you can download that and assemble the assets that they provided for you into your own cityscape if you're using, Blender or 3D Max or something, right? And the cover image from this was something that I was working on translating into Minecraft back in 1.17, back when Tough was added. And I thought, oh, this would be really cool to do like a foundation layer for this big sort of red painted tower that I was reconstructing out of terracotta and red sandstone. And I was building sections of it where there's a big kind of tank on one wall that looks like it should be for, some sort of gasoline or diesel or something, kind of like diesel punk, steampunk kind of vibes. I was building that out of netherite blocks very optimistically. And I did a ton of searching this week to try and find that image again, because I knew that would provide a really solid starting point. And fortunately, I ended up finding it, so you'll probably be seeing that pop up in future survival guide videos where I explain where I'm getting the inspiration for some of the stuff that I'm building. But it's still early days for that project. I'm really looking forward to it. And in the meantime, I've got Fantasy Minecraft SMP, where I'm doing bits and pieces of building, but the exploration in Fantasy Minecraft is so much the driving force of a lot of the stuff that I'm doing that I often return to my like half-built mansion and then I go, oh wait, I should probably build some of this, shouldn't I? Anyway, the stream's over, so bye everyone, I'll see you next time, kind of thing.
Right.
So on that, I'm exploring some spell casting stuff. So if anything, the library is going to be the best built section of this creepy mansion that I'm working on, because one of the mods allows you to mouse over any of the books in a chiseled bookshelf and actually see what's on each book without taking them out, which is something that doesn't happen in vanilla. So I found that really helpful, and they've included chiseled bookshelves in some of the structures. So when you find like a witch's house, then you can mouse over some of the books and look at which ones are vanilla enchantments that I understand and which ones are modded enchantments that are probably so specialized that I don't want to deal with them. And so, yeah, I've found some of that. I found some incredible biomes, too. There is a biome, I don't know what mod a lot of these come from. It may be Terralith and some sort of generation, like, remodel of the way vanilla generation works, or it might be a variety of things, like a confluence of mods has all led to stuff generating this way. But there's a biome called Prisma Chasm, which has colorful grass blocks. There's kind of like a prismatic moss covering the ground and a few kind of like little sprouts and stuff, and then crystals everywhere that are modeled after amethyst crystals and a little bit after pointed dripstone. They hang down from the ceiling in some areas, and the ones that grow from the floor are much more like the amethyst crystal model. The cool thing is they are based, I think, on block coordinates when you place them, or at least when they generate in the world, but then you pick one up, and as an item in your inventory, it changes color as you're holding it in a faster animation than like Prismarine does, right?
Right.
So yeah. So it's really fun to imagine building with some of this stuff. I just don't know when you place it back in the world if it applies the kind of block grid coordinates. You put it here so it's red kind of logic, or if it sits there like a Jeb sheep constantly rotating between all of the colors. But it was one of the more fantastical like biomes that I'd found while I was exploring. And then a dragon chased me out of there, and I've kept the coordinates, but I don't know if I'll be back anytime soon.
The screenshots you're sharing are really, really wild. Like just rainbow crystals and stuff from the ceiling. And the fact that they emit light is really cool. Anytime you add something like this to Minecraft that emits light, I immediately am just like, this just feels cool. I don't know whether it's just the zeitgeist of just modern times with everybody having LED lights, on their computers and in their spaces, and outdoor LED lights, all that kind of stuff. But having this kind of stuff in Minecraft is always really, really cool. And it's the kind of thing that would be frustrating if you put it down and you want it to be a color and it just rotates through like the rainbow. Yeah. Because I would just like, if I see it red in the world, I want to pick it up and have it be red in my hand and then have it be red wherever I put it down. That's something that I find very frustrating about the flowers and stuff in Minecraft, where depending on where you place it in the world on the block grid, it will be in the center, it will not be in the center. I have that problem when I'm doing landscaping, where I'm trying to make a bush and a grass and a flower all kind of jive together, and I have to make a decision as to what goes where depending on how the world displays it, rather than having it be displayed with an expectation like a block does. It's like the block is in usually the center of the block space. That's kind of how it rolls. And you've got options with stairs where you can rotate them around. But stuff like this, like I'm glad that amethyst crystals in vanilla Minecraft don't go left or right, you know, or off center. Like they grow and they change shape, but they stay pretty central to how they're supposed to be. Which is nice. I like that they do that. But I love these colors. It's such a cool idea. And although, again, with mods like that, you see something cool like that, and then all of a sudden there's a dragon there. And it's like, dang it. Like,
Yeah.
You know, like I wanted some calm exploration in a beautiful cave, and yet I have to fight this thing. Question actually with regards to that, because it looks like it would have a unique soundscape in the mod pack. Was there like crystal noises or any kind of different music or sounds or echoes or things?
I don't really recall, and it may be just because my attention was on what I was doing and the visual side of things that like on stream I didn't take in whether it had like the kind of amethyst tinkling noise as you're walking around on it. I don't think the moss kind of covering the cave floor really did. So yeah, and I think in terms of soundtrack, they just play a variety of like music from well-known fantasy games in the Fantasy SMP pack. So I think it's like there's music will come up from like The Witcher and Skyrim and stuff. So I don't think it was necessarily native to that environment. But yeah, the interesting thing for me of walking around in modded 1.20 is that this is in 1.20.1, I believe, is that Minecraft has laid such a good foundation for a lot of these mods now that there is less stuff they need to change, or they can take ideas that Minecraft has already incorporated into the vanilla game and just provide a slightly modded twist on them without having to reinvent something that didn't exist before. And I think nowhere is that more present than in terrain generation, because the surface biomes are completely different. Like Terralith has provided a bunch of really cool stuff. There's like a Yellowstone style, like, you know, really colorful overworld biome that you can visit with geysers and stuff. And a lot of that is done with vanilla blocks. Obviously, they don't have to add too much of their own stuff. But when you go caving, cave environments like this exist in vanilla. They just don't have the paint over the top of them of this specific type of biome, right? But you could easily stroll through an area that looked like this and just have it be a lush cave or a dripstone area. And I think the cool thing is, so much of the template for this exists in vanilla Minecraft now. The modders just have to put their own spin on it. The same even goes for the crystals in this biome, because they are basically the same model as amethyst crystals. They just changed up the colors of them and added some variety and coded them so that they would sparkle differently or whatever. And I think it's really cool that people are able to work within Minecraft's own sort of style and still not have to completely reinvent caves in order to do that, right? And so the game building up features on its own is a really great way of encouraging modders to do their own thing with it after that.
One of my favorite things that landscaping mods and biome mods do that I feel is much closer to the experience that I would want is not necessarily adding any new blocks. I think the time that you'd see a new block would be maybe a new tree, like a new tree type, like a dark spruce, or like they would make something up. So you have like a gray wood or, you know, something like that. But the actual ground, like the grass and the rocks and stuff like that, you very seldom would you see new blocks, but it would be a different arrangement of existing Minecraft blocks, you know, like, so they would take, you know, tuff and blackstone and other darker blocks and deep slate, and you'd get like a volcanic biome. And they just take blocks that are normally deep in the world, they put them on the surface, and they add extra lava pools, and it looks very Minecrafty. Like, it looks like this could be achieved in vanilla, or the kind of thing like this might be built by a player in vanilla as like a biome project, but it's part of this really cool mod pack for landscaping, like Terralith or whatever it was at the time. And I always really like that kind of stuff because it doesn't feel so far-fetched. And I feel like you also can see stuff like that and get inspired to maybe do it in your own vanilla world, whether you've got a single player or maybe you're part of a vanilla server. And by playing modded on those kind of mods, it's less frustrating, because then when you see something in a mod pack where like everything is kind of brand new and like there's all these alien textures, and you're just like, well, it's cool and it's inspiring, but like I really can't duplicate this in vanilla Minecraft, or I can't take this and learn from it and do something cool. Or even just like seeing a new block combination, like I've never thought about putting granite next to like, insert other block here. And if you see that in a mod pack, you're like, oh wow, like I've never thought about that. I bet you I could have some really fun and really fun times intentionally mixing that up in vanilla Minecraft.
Yeah, there was a small biome, like an island in the ocean, that I found while I was exploring by boat, and it was a volcanic-looking island. So they'd brought basalt and blackstone from nether biomes and effectively made an overworld biome out of those with a little bit of grass and like kind of a brighter biome color, and making it look like, yes, this is kind of fertile because it's sort of volcanic and there's been a lot of like, igneous rock and stuff around. And it was really different approaching that by boat as opposed to just kind of rolling up to the usual sort of Minecraft shoreline where there's a bit of sand and then a forest biome, or like a stony shore biome or something like that. And that really felt exciting, but it also felt very achievable to the vanilla player. So I think that's an idea I might bring back into Survival Guide at some stage as well, and build my own like custom made volcanic island somewhere.
Well, I've been dealing with some volcanic power or some magma power. I don't know how you want to say it, but the iron farm on the Citadel, the retrofit, is finished on the outside anyway. And I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. We've got kind of an homage to the original design with the 4 pillars and the use of leaf blocks to spawn-proof all of the details. So I added all the copper pipe details that we talked about last week to all the sides. I added a lot of like glowberries and hanging vines underneath it, and I added a lot of leaf blocks kind of peppering the sides of it as if it's had a mossy roof that's been overgrowing and hanging down the side. And it serves 2 purposes. It does pay some homage to the original design, but it also spawn proofs all of those little blocks, because every now and again I would have an iron golem spawn on one of these pipes just as I was moving things around and getting things decorated. It would just spawn at the right time. So I'm glad that I was able to accomplish that. And one thing I had not anticipated, I'm in one of the mountain biomes. It's not quite a mountain, but it's one of the mountain adjacent biomes. And so I get snow on things anywhere above Y113. And so I had to make the essential choice, not just the design choice, but I had to put moss carpet and green carpet on the top of every top level leaf on this build, which does make it look more dense. It's like, it's not a bad thing. Plus, you're never, unless you're flying over it with elytra, you're never going to see the top of this thing. Yeah. And so I had to do that because the snow accumulating just didn't look that good. Like the white snow on top of all these warm colors and this kind of like tropical looking lush overgrowth didn't really vibe. And I didn't want to put string everywhere, so I just used carpet to keep the snow off of it. So, and it seems to be doing just fine. But I really like the use of the glowberries and the hanging vines. And I did attempt to remove that green shoot, the green drop shaft for the iron golems, thinking like they probably don't have any drift. Incorrect. They do indeed have a little bit of drift. And it was the fact that the opening at the bottom in the melting pot was the same size as the opening at the top. I think if you could avoid this, if a 2x2 at the top was going into a 4x4 hole at the bottom, I don't think they would ever catch the side. But what was happening was like the corner of their hitbox was hitting the side of the melting pot and they weren't falling in. So I didn't have a choice. I had to put it back, and I think it looks better with the green drop shaft going in there anyway, because it helps bring out some of the other green that's in there. I also added green glass panes going up the 4 pillars, and they're lit at the top and the bottom by shroom lights. So depending on which section you're looking at, there's like this green glow that kind of comes up from the bottom or down from the top, which I really, really like. So it's come together quite nice. It looks fantastic at nighttime. It's much prettier than the old one. And so I'm really happy with the way that it's come out. I am, however, done with doing block details at 50 to 70 blocks above the ground. Like that is, I'm quite happy to not do that for next little while. There's a lot of up and down, pretty tedious. Happy to not have to do scaffolding, and I was using sandstone slabs to move around horizontally, and I'm glad that part's over, because it was a lot of like going up and down. And I have to say, one of the mods that we use on the Citadel, it's FreeCam. People have probably seen it on Hermitcraft and other servers. And it is really handy when you're doing something like this and you are, as a player, specifically where you need to be to place blocks and make changes. And then you can take the camera and go back down to the ground, or just back yourself up by 24 blocks and get like a faraway view without losing where you're standing. And then you can go right back into your player and continue to make the changes. It saves so much time of using a rocket to fly away, spin around, see if it looks good while you're moving, and then also land on probably the one wide piece of scaffolding that you were standing on, to get to that one specific spot. And so very happy to be done with all of that nonsense, at least for now.
Yeah, it's looking great. Have you had a chance to incorporate the crafter yet? Because I know that was an ambition of yours with the iron farm.
I have started. I haven't actually added the crafter itself, but I've done a lot of the prep. So the next thing that we did after we finished the outside was work on the redesign of the inside, the collection chamber. And the collection chamber, the old design was, again, kind of an homage to the old farm. So it had a lot of green concrete, a lot of spruce wood, that kind of thing. And so what I've done is I've taken the deep slate, nether brick, and copper and acacia pipes and kind of brought it into the new room. So it feels very inside furnace like, and then you exit into the grassy outside, which is I haven't done any landscaping, so like the door to the outside is very plain. It kind of matches the moss door. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know whether I'm going to make these more subtle or we're going to make them more pronounced. Either way, they're kind of just regular spruce doors right now. But the redstone, I have taken a first stab because once again, I got inside to design the collection room, and I think it's a good idea that if you're going to be designing a farm, what you should be designing is the collection room first rather than the redstone first, because I need a place to aim the items coming out of the redstone to go someplace. And if I don't know where they're going, then I'm just kind of wasting my time. I might have to move a complicated redstone block, or contraption like 3 blocks to the left. So I did all the placement. What we're planning to collect is iron blocks. So we're going to be using the crafter to make iron blocks. And then we're going to be collecting poppies, red dye, white dye, and pink dye. And so I'm going to learn how to create all those different things with the crafter and separate them out. Now, separating them out should be fine. I can put them all up in the same item stream and then have just an item filter at the top, grab the ones and put them in the right boxes. And because of the condensing nature of the crafter for the iron, I'm switching from having a bunch of double chests to I'm going to go get some extra shulker boxes, and we're just going to have shulker boxes placed on the wall. There's one there right now, and then I've got some polished deep slate kind of place holding where the other shulker boxes are going to be. And so we're going to have 4 shulker boxes for iron and then 1 shulker box of each of the other items that I mentioned. And right now, I think I've learned in a creative world how to do the 9x9 crafter thing. It seems pretty straightforward. It's, you have just a comparator comparing a full volume container to make sure that you get the signal strength of 9. And the cool thing about that, especially with the crafter, is that whenever I do item streams like this with water streams, I always had to have an auto dropper. And the crafter can now replace the auto dropper because the crafter will spit the item directly into the water stream. So I can remove a function that I used to have. The thing that I'm actually struggling with is how to separate out the poppies into collecting poppies, sending some poppies to be turned into bone meal, sending some poppies to be turned into red dye, and then sending some red dye and some white dye into turning into pink dye. So I can craft bone meal or poppies into bone meal into white dye easy enough. It's, I can combine red dye and pink dye easy enough, or red dye and white dye easy enough to make pink dye. There's going to be a lot of redstone underneath this thing. Like, it's going to be like things are going to be constantly dropping down into lower levels until they have to shoot back up and be part of the mainstream. But the thing that I'm struggling with is having an item separator. And it's not just splitting something in half. It's more like pulling off a siphon and then having an overflow. So I don't want to have the poppies full up before they start making red dye. Like, I kind of want to pull some away, and I don't want to do it in a way that's random or an even split, because like, do I want to split half the poppies? I don't know. The one thing I was toying around with, because you can take a comparator output from a composter, I thought, well, I'll bring some poppies into the composter, and every time the composter makes a piece of bone meal, then I can take that as a signal, as like taking out of the comparator, and have that either lock or unlock a hopper. And because we've got very simple T flip-flops now with the copper bulb, you can, every time a bone meal piece is crafted, you can turn on the bulb and turn off the bulb, like vice versa. And so you could have like essentially like a valve. like every time the composter makes bone meal, the valve would either open or shut, or open or shut, and that would just kind of give a certain number of poppies the ability to go through. And I just don't know what that number looks like, because I haven't really calculated what the farm does for poppies. I know it does 46 iron ingots an hour roughly, but I don't know what it does for poppies. So I don't know what the volume is, and I also need to make sure that, like, in the event that everything gets full up, like, what do we do with the overflow? And so it's funny that I've been watching a lot of Satisfactory videos lately, because that game is coming out in 1.0 in September, and there's a lot of overflow consideration in that game, because if you don't have overflow, then your machines will back up. And that's what's going to be happening here. Like, if I don't have a place for all this stuff to go in the end into, I mean, at the end of the day, you can just throw it all into a cactus or a lava pool or whatever and waste it. But at the same time, like, if my bone meal overflows, like, could I just store the bone meal somewhere? Like, there's just a bunch of stuff I have to consider. So I haven't really gotten there yet, because it's kind of complicated, but I'm looking forward to the challenge. It's going to be fun.
I'm thinking one of the ideas I might have for this industrial castle I'm planning is to make that the site of a factory that uses a lot of the crafter and does, like, a lot of that kind of auto crafting step. And yeah, I hadn't considered the fact that, yeah, in order to make bone meal and red dye from poppies, you have to split the poppies up somewhat evenly between two different crafters, and normally I'm used to just letting everything run through, and an iron golem's only going to drop them like one or two at a time, so you can't always guarantee that just, like, having a second hopper attached to the first is going to be enough, that it would push and pull for both, like, poppies, because sometimes you might just get one, and then your bone meal one is always going to be preferred over the one that siphons off some for red dye. So yeah, that's smart. Like, I think there's some really interesting systems that you can learn from, like, installing something like a copper bulb and having that kind of show tick on and off kind of when one hopper is locked and the other isn't, and vice versa, right? Like, that's a neat way of using them, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, I tried doing some basic item splitting, but what works with a stack, like, if you have a hopper minecart underneath a couple of like a system, and then there's two hoppers underneath that, it'll be it'll remove them evenly. 32 and 32 will go left and right, but that only works if there's a stack being entered at a time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you just get one at a time, then it's always going to favor one over the other,
one
right?
side. Yeah, so it's tricky that way, and I think you'd have to, like, I'm less worried about, like, the server needs, because it's such an old server. People have dye, people have poppies. It's more of just like a fun challenge to see if I can figure this out. So I think it'll be, if anything, I think the dyes would be something more useful than the poppies. So I'm less likely to keep more of the poppies and more likely to put, like, a higher number of poppies towards being crafted and turning them into other things. So we'll have to see. And we've got other sources of bone meal. So, like, I'm not worried about keeping the bone meal. The bone meal is really just like a stopgap before the white dye. So
yeah,
we'll have to see.
You have your moss farm famously quite close by to this, so I'm sure you could siphon off all the bone meal you needed, but it's about the individual farm providing, like, all of the stuff that it potentially can. And I think a lot of people are working towards that now with farms with the crafter, is like, what is the potential for this? How many items can I make out of this, even if it's not that convenient to do so? And I think that's fascinating. I think that's one of the ways that the crafter really opens up gameplay. So yeah, definitely keep us informed in future episodes. I'm delighted to hear how that's going.
Yeah, there'll be some screenshots. I don't know how much of it's going to be explainable, because, as we've talked about, like, Redstone after the fact is always tough. But it's a tight space down there right now. I will eventually open it up and get a clearer look at what's going on. And I do like designing the back end of my Redstone. So, one, it's a fun project, but two, it's much easier when you return to something years later and just, like, you don't have to refresh your memory. You can clearly say, that's an item separator, this is a filter, that's a crafter that's making XYZ. Like, if you do your job right, then it's pretty easy to come and troubleshoot something, especially if mechanics change. You know, if Minecraft changes Redstone or anything, then you can at least go back and check things out. And speaking of those changes, there's been a new snapshot this week. Moving into the news, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 24W34A was published on Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. This is the next snapshot for 1.21.2. It contains some much requested tweaks to experimental features, as well as some technical changes and optimizations. The bundle tooltip now fits 3 rows and can always show at least 8 item types. A developer's note provides more clarity on why they've chosen to display items in fixed rows instead of shuffling them around. Minecarts no longer forcefully snap to the center of blocks when landing on a rail. Minecarts snap to corners along the diagonal and snap to center when being pushed by a piston. This also allows for piston bolts and similar contraptions. Dispensers are allowed to stack minecarts again. Minecarts now more easily come to rest at opposing slopes. Minecarts no longer tilt during a short fall or when they are falling straight down. Minecarts are now placed or dispensed with the correct rotation straight away when put on rails. They are also placed with the correct rotation on slopes. Minecarts no longer phase through blocks on slopes when going up or down. They will collide instead. Redstone experiments continue this week. Redstone wire updates now have a left first preference. That means if there is a fork in a wire and the distance on both sides is the same, the left side will be updated first. The remaining edge cases, which are still random, are situations where wire gets powered from above or below without enough context. Changes in 24W34A. These changes apply to the game regardless of whether they are experimental features and they are on or off. Projectiles such as arrows, tridents, and fishing bobbers now bounce off the world border if hit. Frame rate has been improved when using higher render distances, significantly reducing performance impact when turning the camera. The recipe book now repeats the last selected recipe when a selected key is pressed, for example, spacebar or enter. Items which convert to another item after consumption will no longer do so in creative mode. For example, a honey bottle will no longer add a glass bottle to your inventory when consumed in creative. Fixed bugs in 24W34A that are worth noting. It is impossible to put a water cauldron underwater. Minecarts can phase through blocks when traveling diagonally upwards. Various issues with enchantment glint visibility have also been fixed. For the full list of bugs fixed in this snapshot, check out the changelog at minecraft.net, linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
We will also have a link to Minecraft Bedrock Edition Beta and Preview 1.21.30.24. And that's linked over at feedback.minecraft.net. This was published on Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. This is a beta and preview that mostly focuses on bringing bundles up to speed with the latest Java snapshots. Previous changes to trial chambers in the beta and preview 1.21.30.21 were reverted due to some unforeseen issues. There are also a few small performance and parity updates. That's the summary of the whole thing. Once again, the full Bedrock beta and preview changelog can be found linked in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
So how do you feel about the changes to bundles?
This was always going to be the hot button question, wasn't it? I think they are better. It's better that we can see more items. That was my main problem with it, was the loss of information when you put a few items in there. The developer's note helps to clarify their position on why they've made the changes that they have, and I think a lot of the bundle UI is a concession to trying to keep the UI similar across different platforms, and I can see why having a smaller interface, or at least an interface that is more visible like that for smaller screens, makes a lot of sense, because if you're playing Minecraft on your phone, you know, it's going to be a very different experience to me playing Minecraft on a 4K monitor, but they need to have a UI that works for both, and that's a huge challenge. So I think, obviously, expanding that to include some extra rows makes a lot of sense. I'm still going to find it painful not knowing absolutely everything that's in there once it gets above 12 items, but I need to spend more time actually using them in survival, I think, because the way I use bundles a lot of the time, it's just storage space for, like we said last week, some crafting stations, right? So like the stone cart of the furnace, the crafting table, the ender chest, they all go in there. And if I'm mostly using it for those 4 things, I'd have to put another 8 items on top of that before I start to run into issues where I can't get to those anymore. I also need to figure out whether or not, I haven't actually looked at the snapshot in this amount of detail, how you scroll to the items that are further down than like 9 items into a bundle, if you can still use the number keys on your keyboard for that, or if you have to use a mouse scroll wheel for that. Because I presume not having any of those interfaces on console or mobile devices, it works differently on mobile, so they're sort of free to do whatever they want with the Java control scheme for those. And I don't know if they use the rest of the number row and include 9, 0, minus, and plus in there, or if they decided to just use the scroll wheel to interface with that, in which case they could potentially bring back the functionality I was missing where you can move the bundle around your inventory using the number keys. I think it just depends on what works best for player accessibility, for people who prefer to use a keyboard over a mouse, or, may not have the manual dexterity to use a scroll wheel all the time, or may not have a scroll wheel on their control scheme, right? So I think that it makes sense for them to still use the number keys for that. I need to get a bit more familiar with it before I can really be judgmental about it again. And it also doesn't help that Fantasy SMP has the old style of bundles. So right now, the only version in which I'm using a bundle at all regularly is 1.20, where it's just the implementation of bundles that was in the game before this. And so now I'm teaching myself to use bundles the wrong way, when if they get implemented this way, I'll need to teach myself again to use them the right way. So I think that's why I need to get into the Snapshot this week and actually play around with it. Potentially, even if there's another Snapshot on Wednesday, I might dive in on Wednesday and take a look and see if any other tweaks have been made since. The other thing I have found generally, though, is that there's still so much community misunderstanding around bundles. I made a video last week, and I still had so many people leaving opinions in the comments about how we should just go and get shulker boxes instead, and, how they should just implement backpacks or whatever, and people are expecting them to be something they're not. It's a junk drawer, it's not a whole new wardrobe, right? Like, that's the way I'm thinking about them, and I really hope that once they're actually implemented in game, more people play around with them and figure out what they're actually for, because I still think there's a lot of willful misrepresentation of what a bundle is from the community, when really they're quite a useful tool and can even pair well with stuff like shulker boxes when it comes to organization. So yeah, I'll report back, I think, next week once I have a bit more experience with the new refresh of bundles, and I honestly think expanded UI is going to be a good thing regardless, so I'm hopeful that they take it maybe even a little bit further in that direction to make them more ideal for how I'd want to use them.
Yeah, when I hear that comparison to like just go get shulker boxes, which I think I might have even made myself last week, it does sort of remind me of those make easy button retorts that people have. Like, what they want is a shulker box that's accessible without having to beat the dragon and go to the end and go to the outer end islands and kill shulkers.
Yeah, made of one string and one leather, right?
The
cheapest possible crafting recipe.
Yeah, which is what they want, and then Mojang has given them something else, and there's like, no, but like, give us what we want. And that's not the conversation Mojang is trying to have. They're trying to have like, well, how can we make these better? This is what we want to add to the game. I still don't think that bundles are in a great place. I have only watched a couple of videos on them. I've not messed around with them personally, because I'd have to start a new world and walk around and do stuff like that. And I've just got other things going on. And I feel like my reaction is that for as simple as they are supposed to be, they are still too complicated and very UI heavy. There's just so much dependent on how the UI looks, how the UI interacts, how you interact with the bundle, that it's really making what should be a pick it up, put it down, first in, first out sort of situation way more complicated than it needs to be. And part of me, and I made this note for myself today before you mentioned the multiple platforms, so I'm not sure how this would work, but I wonder if the bundles had more of an inline UI with other things in the game. Like, you open up a hopper, a dropper, a chest, a shulker box. They have segmented squares where you can put stuff. And I feel like looking at the bundle UI, like, there's nothing intuitive about how it works. Like, when I see people put things in bundles on videos, it doesn't go in the way that I would expect it to go in. Like, I feel like it's hard to relate that to other containers that you use in Minecraft. Now, part of the confusion there is that if you had a bundle that showed you 9 slots instead of 3 rows, or 12 slots instead of 3 rows of 4, then people might think, I can put a stack in each one of those slots, just like I can put a stack in each one of those slots that I see in other inventories. So I can understand the confusion potential there, but I don't know, maybe there could be a way to communicate that somehow, have the slots be different shapes. There's just something about the bundle and how I'm seeing it being interacted with that just, when I'm watching it on a video, I don't understand what's going on. Like, I have to stop and think, like, what did they just click on? How did that work? Whereas when someone interacts with a chest on a video, you can quite clearly see where things go and how they go in and out, right? And so I think that's one of the things that really needs to be clarified with bundles. And in doing that, I think it might help with those expectations of people wanting like a shulker box or a backpack or just another storage device that you can walk around with. I think that if they communicate it clearly that this is got limits, if they can communicate those limits in the UI as efficiently as possible, then I think that might go a long way.
Yeah, yeah, and there's been a couple of changes from the original bundle idea where the capacity of the items was always communicated numerically before. Like, it always had a 0 out of 64 when it was empty, and then 32 out of 64 when it was half full, and so on. Whereas now the UI has a bar that fills up as well, kind of like a progress to full kind of bar, and that like goes in line with the durability bar that you see communicating durability on tools, even though we can see that numerically if you turn on advanced tooltips on Java. That's nowhere on Bedrock Edition. You don't get that kind of fine detail numeric communication. But the fact that you also don't seem to get that on Java anymore when they've implemented this feature, when they've put bundles UI kind of under a microscope and gone, this is how we need to have it work on both Bedrock and Java, it still feels a little strange to get used to, and you have to do a little bit more, I guess, like either guesstimation, you're sort of figuring, well, there's about 40 items in that, or you have to keep track of stuff, being very precise and making sure you're only putting in 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, and kind of do the maths as you go. And that's another aspect of them that I still need to get to grips with, but again, a bit more full-on survival use, I think, will probably get me used to this bundle experience, and it remains to be seen whether they make any more changes to it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. I have not spent a great deal of time looking at the changes to minecarts and Redstone this week. Have you?
I only through watching videos from friends of the show like Exumavoid and folks like that. And I think the changes make sense. Some of the changes to the minecart animation I think are pretty cool. It makes sense to me. I think I was complaining about they look a little bit wonky in the last episode, and removing the tilt on a minecart falling straight down makes sense. You know, like, yeah. I think it makes it look a little bit less animated, but it also doesn't confuse you. Like, why is it tilting? Like, that kind of stuff I think is nice. I think a lot of the changes to snapping make sense. Piston bolts are back for people that want them. I think it's a nice kind of bridge between, like, we want it to function this way, but we don't want to ruin people's fun, so we'll find a way to have the snapping behave in a way that allows for both, the best of both worlds. And I think what they're trying to balance, and this is something that I did pull from the Exumavoid video, which was dispensers can stack minecarts again, but players cannot. So X's sentiment was like, if you can do this with a dispenser, it's just allowing me to do it in a cumbersome way. Why can't I just do it the way that we've always been able to do it? And I think the balance that Mojang is trying to strike is the expectation of a player on what a minecart will do when you place it on a rail. And then when you place another one next to it, what happens then? If they go inside one another, which is what, you know, players that want to stack them want, that's confusing to just the average player that doesn't even know what to do with a stack of minecarts, right? I think that having them separate, bump into each other, move around, immediately tells the player, oh, that you can't put 2 of these in the same spot. Like, that's just not a thing. And then the more experienced players will know, well, you can if you want to dispense them out of a dispenser and drop them down on top of each other, which for the Redstone people, they're going to know that. There's a community to talk about that. There's going to be a wiki to talk about that. But it removes the confusion out of the base game. So I think they're kind of getting into the best of both worlds in a lot of the changes. The one thing I am curious about, though, is the bug fix to minecarts no longer phasing through blocks when going up or down, and how that might affect collecting mobs in minecarts in the same way that people use like minecarts to grab villagers from villager breeders when they're trying to move one villager at a time to specific situations. They've said that it's going to be easier to put entities into minecarts, but it feels like some of the ways we do that might have to change, because some of the ways that people were doing it were basically like slamming the minecart at an angle up into a block that a villager was pressed up against, and then because the minecart would phase through the block briefly, it would pick up the entity and kind of pull it through the wall and then be on its way, which was a very efficient way of keeping all of your entities contained but being able to grab one whenever you wanted. And that looks like it's not going to work anymore. So I'll have to see what's the easier way. Like if it becomes even easier and more straightforward, like clearer to the player, great. Then that's all good by me. Like it could be something as simple as having the minecarts go in a straight line along a water stream, because of course water doesn't wash away minecart rails anymore. So you could have villagers pressed up against a flat minecart rail, as long as there's something near their head, like a piece of glass that they can't pass through, then they'll be stuck. And if the minecart picks one up and just the glass doesn't suffocate the villager, then great. Like that's super simple. It's just a matter of whether that will work and whether this is going to break a lot of stuff for people. But I think that as long as people are looking at the grand scheme of minecart changes and realizing it's going to be better for the game as a whole, then yeah, you know what? You're going to have to go back and maybe retrofit some of your old Redstone designs. But I think that Mumbo said it best when, he said that one of the things he likes is being able to figure out new ways to do things when old things are broken, because he was exploiting a glitch. He was using odd behavior in Redstone or minecarts. And now that they have a more regular behavior, it's just a matter of adapting and figuring out a new way to do things.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's the thing I'm looking forward to as well, is like the changes to minecarts, the changes to Redstone. Does that break anything I've already made? If so, how simple is it to fix? Is it more logical when it works the way it does? And I think that's going to change very much new player interactions and how intuitive minecarts feel to people who probably avoided them up until now, because some of their behavior is very unpredictable. And I think people still expect stuff like the ability to chain minecarts together so that they'll travel in a train and that kind of stuff. I wonder if when the dust settles on some of these changes and we get a finalized version that both the devs and the community are happy with, if the next step forward is, well, maybe we introduce some new mechanics to minecarts because people are more comfortable with using them in this state, and we're more comfortable with how they're coded and how they behave. So that would be on my sort of like wish list, would be maybe then we get a new revolution in minecarts. People are using them for transport more because they can go through portals and have connected railways through the nether. And then maybe we start to upgrade what a minecart experience is like in 2025 or whatever. That's sort of what I'm eyeballing as the future of the minecart in this game.
This does feel like the safety inspection that you do on the house and the foundation before you make the addition. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
yes.
it makes sure that there's no mold. Do you have the right foundation? Is your 60-year-old home up to code? Like, is your 15-year-old minecart, code up to the challenge of being changed and updated? And if no, then what do you have to do to make the foundation level for improvements going forward? Like it's a really good analogy. I feel like that's definitely what I'm feeling with this, is that it's not meant to be making sweeping changes. It's meant to be the prep. Like you want a clean slate before you make the changes. And speaking of like predictability, the left first redstone wire preference makes total sense to me. I think that's a very simple solution. The fact that the one random situation that's left where they are powered from above or below, where it does actually randomly choose between left and right, is something you would have to work hard to randomly stumble upon. Like you'd have to be doing some really crazy stuff as a average player messing with Redstone to be confused by that, or you're an experienced Redstone player and you're doing that on purpose. You're trying to power something from below or from above to establish a random result. So I think that's a pretty good solution. And I think that while it, I guess, leans towards, the Western hemisphere and left to right, reading and stuff, I feel like it's still pretty intuitive to, it's going to power from left to right and it's just going to go in that direction. If it's predictable, then good. Like I think that's something that's going to make sense for a lot of people.
They did note in the changelog that they were also working on scenarios which, like the Redstone dust not updating stuff next to it anymore, limited quasi-connectivity, and how that broke a few contraptions that I think the Redstone community has flagged as, we really don't want this to change. So I'm hopeful that they'll be able to resolve some stuff like that as well. Would also still love to hear, I think I mentioned this last week as well, would love to hear via email, if people want to email into the show, a bit more opinion about changes to Redstone and minecarts if you're part of that community, if you're a technical player who uses this kind of stuff a lot. It'd be really nice to get a perspective like that on the show to me and Joel, who are obviously like somewhat technically savvy as far as standard vanilla stuff goes, but we're not quite into the next level of how Redstone systems work, how Minecart systems work, the more game-breaking stuff, or the more, like, high-end Redstone technical play, that stuff maybe eludes us a little bit. So, once again, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got any opinions about that, send them to the usual email address.
Speaking of email, this is the Chunk Mail Dispenser episode, which is where we switch out the main discussion and focus on email for the remainder of the episode. If you would like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please keep the emails short and to the point. It does increase the chances of us reading them on the show, and also allows us to include more email on the show. We've got 4 today, so that's great. And Johnny is going to read the first one.
Yes, this one comes in from Abtruse Storm 29. That's a username that could have featured in our pre-show discussion, actually. Nice one. The subject of this one is Alternate Heavy Core Collection. Hello, Johnny and Joel. Recently, I've been exploring trial chambers in an attempt to obtain the heavy core, but I haven't had any luck so far. I had an idea that I wanted to share with you. Perhaps Mojang could incorporate an item frame with the heavy core in it, which could only be found in certain trial chambers. This would be similar to how the elytra is only found in end ships, in end cities. Additionally, players could be required to go through a series of waves of trial spawners to reveal the location of the heavy core room. I would love to hear your thoughts on this idea. Abstruse Storm 29 died trying to obtain the heavy core.
So I still haven't tried a trial chamber, nor have I tried to hunt down a heavy core, which may require a couple of times through a trial chamber. So I'm going to defer to your expertise on this. I like the idea on the surface, but I suspect that it might be not as simple as I expect.
Yeah. So I've obtained 2 heavy cores so far, obviously both from Ominous Vaults. I consider myself pretty lucky. I got one of them on stream recently along with a Windburst book, and it was the first vault I opened in a new trial chamber. But at that point, I'd been farming the Ominous Keys, so I'd done a couple of trial chambers on my own. I was pretty confident with how the mechanics worked and was quite keen on just getting to the Ominous Vault without any of the fighting and stuff in between. My main problem with them being in item frames, this idea really, is multiplayer servers, because it gives the first person to discover that trial chamber, provided that it has one of these occasional rooms with a guaranteed heavy core in, it gives those people a huge advantage, which is not really what the trial chamber experience is supposed to be about. It's about, on multiplayer servers, going in with your friends, having a bit more of a combat challenge, and then everybody getting a chance to open the Ominous Vault, because they can be opened multiple times, whereas if you've got an item frame, that's not going to refill, right? You only ever get one. And so advantage whoever turns up first with a pickaxe and mines through the wall to find the room to get to it. Players in this game get very familiar with structures. You've only got to look at like speedrunners who know exactly where to go to get the gold blocks out of the foundation of a bastion and then toss all the gold to the piglins to get their ender pearls for the end portal. Like, people find ways of figuring out where the hidden stuff is in structures before they even go to release. So I would expect that unless it was locked behind like some bedrock or something that vanished in the middle of a structure, then you would have a hard time keeping players out of it and convincing players that they had to go through the steps of this challenge in order to obtain it, right? The other problem, the flip side of this, is that item frames are quite fragile. And if you put this in a room where there was a lot of projectile fire, as there typically is in trial chambers with breezes and skeletons and everything, that item frame is getting knocked off the wall, or the wind charge is going to knock the heavy core out of it. And if you don't clock that when it happens, 5 minutes later it's going to despawn, and there goes your chance of getting a guaranteed heavy core. So I still think there's a couple of unfortunate flaws in the idea of guaranteeing somebody a heavy core. I recognize that it's an attractive prospect, especially when you've been grinding for keys and cores and not come up with anything yet, but it's a matter of perseverance. And in a single player world, I can imagine an idea like this going down a storm. It's just the multiplayer aspect of it, I think, that provides the trickiest ground for them to make sure it's a fair experience for everyone.
What about flipping this on its head and taking the mechanics currently of trial vaults to get yourself a heavy core, instead of going out to an end city, seeing a ship, and then being disappointed on a multiplayer server to find out that the ship has already been raided and that there is no elytra in it? Instead of the elytra being on a wall, what if there was a similar mechanic where you'd have to fight something inside the ship, or have a certain number of keys that you've collected from shulker boxes or something, or not shulker boxes, but shulkers in the end city to then potentially get a elytra from some sort of end vault that's in an end city. Therefore, on a multiplayer server, everybody that finds an end city always has a chance to get an elytra. And they could, the RNG of whether or not you get one could be increased or decreased depending on how frustrating it would be. But I feel like that would be better than what is currently the norm on a multiplayer server, specifically a long-term multiplayer server, which is every now and again resetting the outer end islands, because it just means that all of the cities and ships are reset. Elytras and shulker boxes are just closer and easier to get for players that don't want to go farther and farther and farther afield, right?
Yeah, I think when the vault was introduced, one of the earliest ideas I saw somebody say was, oh, they could retrofit this into a bunch of structures that have unique loot that we want. So everybody in an ancient city has a chance to get a silence armor trim, so that everybody raiding an end city gets a chance for an elytra. And I think the problem there is chance, right? Like, if you find an end city ship, but you still need to roll randomly on a vault with a loot table that's not going to guarantee you an elytra, that feels a little different, right? And obviously, like, you and some friends can go there, and if, like, 2 of you get an elytra from an end city ship as opposed to just 1, then that's still a good thing. But I think the way elytra is balanced now, it's not perfect, but I think retrofitting vaults into that structure is something that takes a lot of thought and consideration, because what else do you populate the loot table with? Do you make it so that everybody is guaranteed an elytra? Well, in that case, a bunch of people just have to find one end city, as opposed to encouraging every player on a server to go out and explore the end and seek out their own and have that journey. Somebody just makes like a really quick path to the end and takes it there. It works differently on multiplayer servers, though. Like, a lot of the time, the person who has the first elytra just flies around and scouts for everybody else. So I'm sure players would find a way around it regardless. I'm just not sure if it's 100% the right thing to do with vaults.
Moving on to our next email from Extreme Game DNA, Heavy Core Crafting. Greetings, Johnny and Joel. I was listening to last week's episode 311, and the conversation about the way the mace could have more uses. I don't think the mace needs more uses, but I think the heavy core should. Players could use it as an ingredient for something like a crusher block, crafting table plus a heavy core, and it could be used to break down other items, i.e. cobble into gravel. Also, if the devs wanted to give players renewable sand, they could make it where they had to use quartz and granite, actual materials to make sand, and crush them down with the crusher. I love the podcast. Keep up the good work. Extreme DNA is recovering from a broken foot. He didn't realize how heavy the core actually was.
Yeah, that's an issue. It certainly makes a heck of a noise when you put it down. Like, interacting with it is like interacting with a netherite block. Like, it sounds heavy. And I think that's a good thing. I think they've characterized this block really well, which I think is why we're getting a lot of emails from people with, their imagination running wild with what this thing could actually be used for. Yeah. As for using it as a workstation, though, I'm not certain because of the expense, right? Because I can't imagine them making a crushing workstation so expensive when, so many of the other workstations are really simple to craft. Like, probably the blast furnace is the most complicated one out of all of them, or maybe the lectern. But even then, it's just a matter of smelting a few ingredients or gathering a couple of ingredients, and they're fairly early game things. Whereas getting your first heavy core and having the choice of, do I turn this into a big smashy weapon, or do I turn this into the thing that's going to help me get more sand? I don't know if many players would make the latter decision, right? It's much more exciting for it to be part of a weapon than it is to be part of, like, a centrifuge or whatever the kind of idea here is.
Yeah, my brain went down that road too, and I think they're too tough to gather for a decorative block. It's the same way that people don't necessarily use a lot of lodestones in their decoration, because there's just such a pain to gather the materials for them. And I also think that if it's something essential, like a crafting block, as Extreme DNA mentioned, that forces players that don't really want to engage with the trial chambers to then go and have to engage with the trial chambers just to be able to do sand or gravel or crushed things, whatever that crafting block happens to be. So I was thinking of using them in a different way, because this obviously, they feel similar to the Wither Skeleton Head. They feel similar to the Conduit. And so I thought that it might be interesting to use a heavy core in a beacon. Like, what if it increased the radius of a beacon? What if it increased the number of slots available in a beacon, so you could have one beacon to do, you know, more things than rather than having a couple of beacons next to each other. Just to kind of give it something where it's like, well, you could use it for more than just the mace, but it's an option. It's not something you have to do. It's not something you feel the need to do. It's just like if you're a player that, you know, is going to go get them, then you'll have something else to do other than use it to smash things. And I feel like that could be a one way to look at it, but I couldn't really think of anything to craft, because in anything like that in Minecraft, you just get the one. And so when if you just get the one, then it's kind of like one and done, and then it sits there. And like, again, it goes back to the decorative block idea. Like I just don't, it doesn't seem to fly for me given how hard the heavy core is to get.
Yeah. Like, consider they gave this thing a GUI like a furnace or something, and it could only hold a stack of items at a time and output to a stack of items at a time without, you know, I'm sure there'd be hopper interactions and stuff, but if it was grinding gravel or, you know, granite and quartz and stuff down into sand, you've still got to fill it up somehow. You got to feed those items in, or it's got a limited size GUI, and at that point you want to have multiple crusher blocks doing the work for you so that you can have a higher output, which again means you have to go and do the grind of the 7.5% chance of getting a heavy core again, and like it just loads down the process of gathering like a fairly standard amount of blocks to the point where it's probably still just worth going out to a desert and picking up sand. You know,
Yeah.
It's nice to have options for all of this stuff, but I do think you're putting it not like behind a paywall, but behind a wall of effort that is a little bit too high of a hurdle for most players to clear.
The other thing that I kept on running through my head was, because of the name of it, the heavy core, I kept on thinking about stuff like gravity, like pulling stuff towards it or pulling you down. Like maybe you can sink faster in the ocean, like if you wanted to go down to the bottom of the ocean quickly for whatever reason, if you had a heavy core. Or even just, I guess you could even just apply that to the mace, like players holding mace sink twice as fast as players that don't. I don't know, like that could be useful. It could be a challenge in PvP if there was like a wet arena or something like that. But I also thought about, I guess the conduit sort of does this, because the conduit will, I believe, damage undead mobs in range, I think.
It's any kind of like aquatic hostile mob, so guardians get damaged by it as well if they swim around, and guardians in a weird way are actually drawn to light emitting blocks. It's not like super guaranteed, but like a lot of the time you do find them swimming around conduits if you set one up in an ocean temple. The problem is it's got to be the full arrangement of rings around the conduit, so you have to have all 48 blocks in the right formation for it to open and have that extra ability. So it's not something you get to take advantage of all the time.
No, so I just thought like maybe a heavy core, especially if it's something they could do on land, like, you know, you've earned it through combat, through a trial chamber. And if you then placed a heavy core in the middle of a field and every hostile mob that was trying to come to you was like kind of sucked towards the heavy core, like it could be a way of mob proofing an area in a very unique way where you just kind of created this trap. But again, like, I don't know how practical that is. I'm not sure how useful that it is. I don't know whether that's something that players would want, but for me, it's like, well, that'd be nice to have, but if it's something I don't really care that much about, or if I don't feel the need to do that, other than like the bragging rights, then like I don't have to engage with a trial chamber. So I was trying to come up with ideas that were like nice to have, but not something you would necessarily be like super jealous of if another player had it. You know, and just kind of move on from there.
It's so difficult to balance features like that when it comes to like access to stuff and single player versus multiplayer is always going to be like a really difficult kind of dichotomy to deal with. We'll move on to the next email, though. This one comes in from Kagan W with the subject of swinging hanging signs. Hello, Pix and Joel. I think hanging signs and banners should swing in the wind when you throw a wind charge at them. It would swing just once and then go back to sitting there normally. Maybe this is something an observer could detect, which gives Redstone players more options. Maybe if hit by a lot of wind charges, banners could look tattered, which could give banners an old or torn texture. This could also make banners sit still unless hit by a wind charge. Swaying banners always look awkward indoors. Just a thought I had when walking around my Minecraft world. Thanks, Kagan.
I'm all for banners not moving inside. That's one of the reasons why I don't use them as curtains, as details for cupboards. Like they flow and move inside, and it drives me nuts. My eye twitches when I see it. I'm not sure what the use would be for banners and hanging signs swinging from wind charges other than just like consistent behavior with the environment. Like wind charges flip trapdoors and they trigger redstone components. So I could see that the expectation might be that it would actually hit a hanging sign and move. Any movement in Minecraft is good usually, but I don't know, other than a player throwing a wind charge at a sign and being like, oh cool, it moves. Like what, like you can't have it happen if you're not interacting with it. So it's not like the sign is blowing in the wind and creating some sort of cool environmental experience. And I like the idea on the surface of an observer seeing a hanging sign move and adding that as a mechanic that you could use in Redstone, but I can't see it being adopted widespread because you have limited wind charges. It's not like they're infinite, right? Like you can use a daylight sensor to trigger different things because the sun's always changing. Like you're always going to have that renewable input. Whereas while you can gather a lot of wind charges, you're eventually going to run out, especially if they're in a dispenser and they're constantly being shot at this sign and you're using that as your redstone mechanic. There's other more efficient ways to trigger redstone devices, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Like this kind of reminds me of the way ringing a bell trips an observer because it's a state change for the bell, and you can do more redstone stuff with that. Like I like the idea in principle, and it's nice to have both an aesthetic consideration and a technical consideration when it comes to generating ideas like this. I think that's a good instinct to have, and yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be nice to have, if not necessarily a state where banners never swing in the wind, I think having control over it is really important. There's something I imagine that modders would end up doing, which would be to craft a banner with a wind charge in a crafting table, and then you get a banner that like flies like a kind of pennant flag that you could have on top of a castle or something like that, right? But I feel like Mojang isn't going to have like banners and wind charges craft together because though the wind charge itself feels like a more kind of mystical, ethereal kind of item, and so it feels strange like using it as a crafting ingredient when the interaction could be tactile. So I think honestly Kagan's idea of like throwing a wind charge at it makes sense, but then that state just feels too temporary, I think, for a lot of people, because some people would want a banner to be flapping in the wind constantly without having to set up a dispenser to fire wind charges at it, right? And so I think maybe there's a compromise that could be found there where like if you hit it with a wind charge, it starts blowing in the wind and that sort of just constantly does it. But then if you break that and place it back on the wall, like it stays still again, and maybe you could have the best of both worlds that way. I also really like the tattered, like transformative idea of hitting it with a wind charge too many times. I worry that we'd end up with too many scenarios in which they get transformed by accident, kind of in a similar way to how I was worried earlier the item frame in the trial chamber could end up being broken by a stray skeleton arrow. But I feel that way about whenever anyone decorates with end crystals. I go, well, that's just asking for a skeleton to come along and shoot that whilst you're like running around behind it, and then everything in a 40 block radius blows up. But yeah, I think there's room for this kind of like tactile transformation stuff, like we were talking about with concrete to concrete powder before and that kind of stuff. Interacting with the world around you feels like a really interesting way of crafting stuff, especially in the day of auto crafting, that I think they could do with exploring more.
A tattered pattern and right-clicking with an axe, like the same way that you strip the log or, wax or unwax copper, or roll the exposure date of copper back, and doing that with an axe on a banner to create that tattered look could be interesting. Maybe that's something that you have to do before you put it in a banner pattern, in a loom, because that way you could have different colors and appearing at different sections. It could be really, really interesting. I think adding more variety like that to some of the things that we use for decoration go a long way, because it just provides that level of set dressing that I feel is often missing from Minecraft, especially with any of these sub-block items like hanging signs, banners, stuff like that.
Yeah, playing modded a little bit lately is just like there's a whole world of decorative items that they add in those.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Tattered banners are some of them, actually. Like I've got a couple of things like that flying outside of my half-built mansion on Fantasy SMP. So there's definitely room for it, and I can see players taking them in all sorts of interesting directions.
Last email comes from 3Van, Spreadable Leaves. Hey, Pix and Joel. I don't know what episode it was that I was listening to, but the idea came up of other blocks like pink petals. I was thinking it would be cool if there were specific biomes that had the opportunity to have their leaves on the ground. For instance, in a birch forest biome, there could be birch leaves. In an oak biome, there could be oak leaves, etc. Let me know what you think. 3Van died of old age waiting for new spreadable blocks. I really like this idea. I think this is something I might have mentioned on the show. I don't remember what episode it was either. Though I think there could be more creative options than just leaves. I think leaves would be good. Don't get me wrong. I think maybe one of the biomes, maybe one of the early biomes, like a forest biome, something next to a plains where the players are probably going to spawn most of the time, could have the leaves. But I was thinking like dark oak or mushroom fields could have mushrooms to spread around. Now, the tricky part there would be to try to differentiate them from like the actual mushrooms that are in the game that you can plant. Jungles could have some sort of blossom, maybe like a yellow flower. Mountains could have frost, maybe. Badlands could have pebbles or rocks. And the nether, something weird and glowy. Just give me bioluminescent something to spread around in little dots that I can control. And that changes when the player direction changes. Like pink petals, when you have the opportunity to use them and they look good because they are bright pink, are so much fun. And they really break up the grid of Minecraft. Just like we were talking a moment ago about the sub-block items. They are really, really useful. They can soften things. They can create borders. They can do all kinds of different stuff. And having a few different blocks, I'm not sure what you want to call them, like that in Minecraft with different colors and different textures and shapes would be so fun and so useful.
If you want a really creative one, spreadable blocks in the sign off made me want bucket of peanut butter. And I could just like spread that on it'd be even stickier than honey somehow. Or maybe sweet berry jam was the other thought I had. And you could get buckets of that, and then it would provide like a carpet thin layer of something like slime just to make your house slightly stickier. But aside from that, I think organic blocks and stones seem like the obvious candidates for stuff like that, right? Where you're going to fit like 1 to 4 of them inside the grid of a block, and it can be a little bit customized. I think just seeing what people have done with pink petals to line pathways and create like winding geometrical shapes that feel natural but still kind of bordering something, I think has made me want like pebbles and rocks that fulfill a similar function, because you can imagine like a little rock lined pathway leading up to a house door, or bordering something in a garden. I think it's just natural, and those would be so good in forests if they wanted to revamp a little bit of those. When that birch forest concept art was kind of being blown out of proportion a while ago, there was talk of them having like little kind of clusters of rocks on the ground in forests, and I think if they wanted to add some life to a forest biome, that could be really cool. But then maybe craft them with flint, just have flint have a bit more of a purpose than making flint and steel and arrows. I think that'd be kind of nice to have a decorative thing that you could do with more obsolete resources like that once you reach like end game. I think I'm all in favor of anything that has a little bit more detail, a little bit more life to it, and stuff that you can use as a decorative block. I haven't messed around too much with the piles of leaves that you find in forests on Fantasy SMP, but there's definitely a few of those around. I think I just see them as part of the landscape enough that I'm not terraforming anything there. I'm not taking blocks from there so much. I'm just traveling through, so I haven't thought to go and collect some and bring them back with me. But if they can be sheared or collected somehow, then maybe that's something I should try decorating a little bit of landscape with and see how those feel, because I think they could be just like a static block, and I find that solutions like that now that we have stuff like pink petals, always feel a little bit like, not anticlimactic, but it feels like there could be more done with them. Like there could be more nuance to them, I guess. Like if you have to place them a certain way, they can't be rotated and they're not sort of segmented into this sub-block grid. I do feel like it feels like there's a missed opportunity there to make them something a lot more special. So that's what I'd hope Mojang themselves would do if they implemented something like this.
Yeah, when I think about stuff like this, I think about the kind of clutter that you want to add to detail your builds. Pebbles, having dirt, like even dirt as a placeable block like this, which doesn't make a lot of sense, I guess, in terms of like the fact that pink petals are like above the block surface, like they're not actually on the texture, they're kind of a layer above it, even higher than say like a carpet. But the idea of having stuff like that be around. And that's why I like the idea of pebbles, because like right now, pink petals, you can't place them on stone blocks. Like they have to be on like dirt or grass or otherwise kind of like earth related type blocks. And so if you had another block like this, like a pebble from a Badlands biome or a rock from a mountains biome, something like that, then when you're building your gardens or you're building your paths or you're building your walls, you could have like pebbles and rubble at the base, because you could place, it would make sense that you'd be able to place those on more blocks than just earth related grass blocks, right? There's a lot of potential there, and my mind goes down the rabbit hole. But then again, it's like, well, once you have one or two of these, like why isn't there one for every biome? And like you go down that rabbit hole of like, how can you make them feel special enough and add one or two that have multiple uses? You know, like the yellow blossom idea that I had from a jungle biome. I wouldn't say that a yellow blossom is going to be in every single block, but it would be cool if there'd be just like, you know, green here, green and yellow there, you know, and it would be thicker as you went along, so that you could decide, well, if I'm only going to use the first placement of this yellow blossom, then it's not going to be as intense. And then if I really want the bright yellow flower, I have to go all the way to the end of like the 4 placement, which makes sense because it's going to be a denser piece of foliage. But I know it's fun to mess with, and it's fun to think about.
Like I said earlier, with the way modders have taken Mojang's sort of template for what Minecraft is now and run with it, I feel like the developers themselves have the opportunity to do that with mechanics like that in future. So it remains to be seen what they do with it, but I'm looking forward to it if they do. For now, I think that's where we'll wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show was composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, where pledging at any level will get you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have our monthly hangouts where patrons can let us know what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. And once again, the next one is coming up on Saturday, August 31st. We currently have 315 patrons, which is down 1 from last week, so we'd love to welcome more people in as we move into September. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Monday on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. And of course, the video version goes out on YouTube as well. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the program.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by PixelRiffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/PixelRiffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series, and right now I'm playing on Fantasy Minecraft SMP. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, currently covering Season 10. You can find us through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at PixelRiffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe, my podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I'm Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch. Very easy to find. I stream Wednesday through Saturday, usually in West Hill, but lately we've been fixing the Citadel Iron Farm, so the guts of that are coming up next.
Thanks for visiting The Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and the mail is getting chunkier.